Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you for your leadership on these issues, too. So yeah, I'm Troy Hartley. I'm director of Virginia Sea Grant. And Virginia Sea Grant is a 7-university coalition. We're headquartered right here at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, VIMS at William & Mary, and composed of the universities of Virginia, Virginia Tech, and George Mason, James Madison, Old Dominion, and Virginia Commonwealth Universities. So a comment from Rear Admiral Phillips this morning resonated when she was wondering, and she moved into this area. I lived in a city that's not in a county. What's that about? Well, we live in these are 7 independent universities as well. They are cities without a county. There is no overarching University of Virginia system with chancellor or president over the all. So they act quite independently, and that is both our greatest strength and sometimes a challenge. It has made and created a competitive environment that has produced world-class universities, and the academic foundation and resources and assets that are in Virginia are outstanding and amazing. And so we're quite lucky to be there and to be doing work with all of these universities, the 7 universities that are parties to Virginia Sea Grant. And we fund and conduct research, education, outreach, and communications on critical coastal and marine issues in Virginia, and we've been very active in this resilience space, particularly on topics of design, community engagement, legal and policy analysis and research, and increasingly in this space of the water management economy and resilience innovation. We work really closely and have a number of partnerships with several of the engineering and architectural and environmental consulting firms in the region in workforce development, in resilience fellowships and research fellowships in that space. In large part because we really believe that we need some innovation in this space. We need new solutions and new options. But across the board, I think we're seeing new innovations in policy spaces, new innovations in resilience designs, technologies, and strategies, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think I'm going to also make a reference back to Kurt Smith's comments about the new railroad on the Eastern Shore is to space. How many people saw the Tom Hanks movie Apollo 13? Oh, a lot of you. Okay, so also all of you at the table who saw a young student not raise their hand, that's because their mom wouldn't let them go to a PG-13 movie because they weren't old enough. So it makes me feel pretty old. But there was a scene in that movie, if you remember, where the carbon monoxide level was going up in the capsule as they were coming back, and they brought a whole bunch of engineers and scientists into a room, and they just threw on the table, duct tapes, socks, all kinds of crazy pieces of equipment, and they said, your job is to figure out how to bring that carbon monoxide down, take this round hole and make all these square things fit in it. And a little bit, it's a driver for innovation. It's a driver for new ideas. And some of the challenges that we've been talking a lot about all morning, I think are also a driver for new ideas and innovation, and that's really where we have to go. And as an example of that, Virginia Sea Grant is leading a Go Virginia Region 6 planning grant to explore the makeup and execution of a water management economy, a resilience R&D and water management economy, and including innovation in all the spaces, and where's that innovation come from, and who are all of the players in the state that are involved with that. And that's where this panel comes from, because we have a lot to learn from Louisiana about what they've accomplished in that space too, but also some of the challenges that they've faced, things that have been much harder in building a resilience R&D and water management economy. And our context is different in Virginia, and this is a kind of a fact-finding discussion. That's the first of a series of discussions that Virginia Sea Grant will be sponsoring with these Go Virginia funding, including some workshops that will go into 2019. There's a fairly large planning committee, many of which are in this room, that are in that R&D space, in the workforce development space, the commercialization space, the public-private partnership space. And so we're excited about hearing from you guys and learning from you guys. And so let me just get started and launch into this and let the 4 speakers, I'm only going to introduce them really very, very briefly because you do have full bios in your program. I've asked each speaker to talk for about 8-10 minutes. so that we'll have time for questions at the end. And first up in this list, and for you guys, I'm going to sit in Robert's space as we go down. I'm going to give my little timer, so if you keep you on track for 10 minutes. But first up is going to be Robert Twilley. He's the executive director of Louisiana Sea Grant College and chairman of the board for the Coastal Sustainability Studio, which I'm really interested to hear a lot more about, at Louisiana State University. So welcome, Robert.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here. Always great to get back to Chesapeake Bay, and where I spent 5 years doing my postdoc up at the state north of you. At Horn Point. Also, I'm Louisiana Sea Grant Director, as you heard. So we do these things for our other Sea Grant directors. So I'm up here as a host helping Troy out. We don't keep score, but he owes me one. So everybody, you got that on film, so it's for the record. And I also want to say that I'm a systems ecologist, and standing up here on a panel talking about economy makes me a little nervous, but I'm going to set the need, and then maybe, I know the panel members following will establish how we responded. So you see this picture, and I've heard this comment. It was really appropriate comment this morning about when do you do your planning? Doing a planning after a crisis versus doing your planning, your thinking before a crisis is really important. And we've been thinking about our coastal situation for a long time, basically because of the need related to responding to a crisis. Although it's a gradual crisis of losing land. You probably hear I'm hosted at LSU, and we like talking football, particularly this weekend. And so we talk about losing a football field of wetlands every hour or something to that effect. I want to place it in a little different context. If you live in Houma, Louisiana, or south of Highway 90 in Terrebonne Parish or in Barataria Parish, the Gulf of Mexico has migrated 18 kilometers inland since 1932. That's 10 miles. So just imagine if the Chesapeake Bay was moving to your communities 10 miles since 1932. I remember testifying to an Environment and Public Works committee after Katrina, and I made the comment that this is not about people moving toward the coast. This is a coast moving toward people. And so we were planning and been working on different plans. This first one you see is corporate. We started this in 1990. And it was to sort of develop an idea from the Coast 2050 as to how to respond to our coastal situation. And then the restudy program was for a WRDA authorization. That's a great process for planning, is to do a chief engineer's report. I was very much involved in doing that, and you really, it makes you sit down and think about your future and what you want to achieve. And then we had Hurricane Katrina, and we went into a totally different mode. But when we hit this, we did this master plan document in 18 months. Now they're doing them in 5-year intervals. And in fact, the next plan that we do is 6 years. We did this in 18 months. And we did this because of all the thinking and planning that went into the chief engineer's report relative, and we reorganized state government, we reorganized ourselves so that we could integrate restoration and protection and develop a new authority to that effect. And the federal government responded as well, and then we have the subsequent plans that come out every 5 years, as you can see here, and we're now starting a master plan for our 6th year where we will spend $1 billion next year on projects that will actually be constructed. And the thinking that goes behind that goes all the way back to that Coast 2050 plan that was done in the mid-1990s. Now I want to bring up this image because when we were doing all those master plans, it was an ecosystem restoration plans. And after Katrina, this plan that was Baton Rouge Area Foundation developed this idea and brought in Peter Calthorpe from California, well-renowned, only person I've ever worked with who was actually on the front cover of Time magazine. And so Peter was fantastic. We spent a year together, and what he established was he found quite fascinating that he was doing a regional planning project on a landscape that he didn't know where it would exist 10 years from now. So this dynamic of working in coastal landscapes that are changing relative to your regional planning idea was a real challenge. And what this all established, again, is, in one of my short quotes I remember saying then, is before this plan, we were building wetlands just for the sake of building wetlands. It was for ecosystem services. After this plan, we were building wetlands with a zip code. It was all about aligning your ecosystem restoration with your regional planning. And that integrated approach was very important. And so to do that, though, changes and sets up this whole idea of an economy. Because the partnerships that it takes and the people we have to bring around the table to do this is quite incredible. And you have to have a common language. I've heard that already today, and I just want to reemphasize that. You know, this is my picture that I love, a Fisk diagram of the meandering of the Mississippi River. You can couch that toward the fact that not only does a river organize ecological systems, what you see there in shades are arpents. That's how we actually gave out land grants organized around the river. The river is an organizing principle of both our ecological systems, our economic systems, and our communities. And then in order to deal with the water problems, you know, in our case is the engineering solutions. So if you want a common language across these three images, it requires a lot of people sitting around the table. And so in order to do this, this is the real challenge as an institutional development to respond to that. And I remember our last night sort of celebrating the Louisiana Speaks document. I remember Peter asking me, you know, well now what are you going to do to build institutions to carry these ideas forward? And this was our response at LSU. It was called the Coastal Sustainability Studio. And we built it so that we could organize the university's approach around these three common languages that we knew we had to build. There's a famous saying that while society's problems become more complex, universities become more compartmentalized. And it's very true. The way we teach and the way that we train students today becomes very problematic relative to the problems that we're trying to solve. And so this is the language, and just to give you an example of the principles by which we converted this idea into reality, is to put three colleges around this central principles. And that was our design college, which has landscape architecture and architecture, sitting next to our engineering college, sitting next to our oceanography and coastal science. And having these students from these three groups work on projects, and around that evolves a whole suite of departments and new ideas and creative internships and courses. I'm now teaching a new class. That's a gen ed class called Ecosystem Design, and it's great to have you know, social scientists and engineers and architects in the same class teaching systems theory. So this is, you know, a response, and just a few comments to, where am I, how am I doing? Okay, so I got 2 minutes. So just to sort of wrap up and give you some of the challenges of why the distinguished panel is going to follow up with what it takes really, and what kind of economy and the kinds of industries and all the to fill this complex void that I've set up here in this demand, is that in many cases, and I've heard a little bit of this already this morning, is that what we're facing is designs that were established in the late 1800s for single purposes of landscapes. And that was for, in our case, a river, to satisfy navigation and flood control. And that was the entire focus, the consequences of which, however, we knew what the consequences would be in the 1879 National Geographic completely predicted the fact that the collapse of the Delta and the migration of the Gulf of Mexico would occur. But be that as it may, even though we knew those consequences would occur, the challenge is that once what we're trying to do now in this economy that we're building and the specialists that we're putting around the table is we're trying to build multi-purpose views of these landscapes. And that really opens up, you know, the complexity of the disciplines that we need, because it's how do you negotiate trade-offs, and how do you negotiate and change designs in the way we've thought about our landscapes to where they're not serving just one purpose, but we're being inclusive and trying to build more sustainable purposes. And it's a real challenge, and it requires a lot of different people at the table, a lot of different disciplines, and a very strong integrated effort. And I'll finish things up there. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I want you to jot those down because I want you to hear each of the messages, each of the stories before we bring those back. And I do appreciate what a big lift I've been asking, because LSU plays Alabama in football tomorrow night. And yeah, Robert's been telling me that every call I've had. So next up, Dale Morris, who's the Director of Strategic Partnerships with the Water Institute of the Gulf. So welcome, Dale.
Thank you. So I'm Dale Morris. I know some of you from my previous role at the Netherlands Embassy in Washington for 20 years coordinating the Dutch government's water management efforts in the U.S., and that led me to Louisiana post-Katrina, and I met some very fine people there, and they asked me to help them to create something sort of in 2009 to 2011 based upon a Dutch institution called Deltares. And that institution is the Water Institute of the Gulf. So I moved over to the Water Institutes, working in Louisiana, working around the Gulf Coast and the rest of the U.S., but I live in Virginia, and many of you know that I'm passionate about this region. Not only for national security purposes, but just the beauty of the region and the importance of it to the state. So I think if you want to understand the Water Institute of the Gulf in 8 minutes, tough, but we'll do it. The context. Robert mentioned almost 1,900 square miles of land loss since 1930s. So the water's coming at you. It's not if, it's how fast. About a football field every 45 minutes is lost, depending on who you ask. So a football field, an hour. That's ongoing. A lot of man-made degradation of the marshes there that provided protection and ecology and economy going underwater. A loss of sediment starvation, a loss of nutrients and other things. And then Katrina, so man-made storms, man-made shocks, nature-made shocks, most recent Katrina, and then the BP oil spill. And all this led Louisianans, I think, to ponder. So there's all this money being spent. There's this tremendous need to spend it wisely, because resources, $1 billion next year, Robert mentioned that. Think about spending $1 billion on projects. It's a lot of money. And I think in Louisiana they realized they needed an organization that helped them think, underpin the science of how to do that. Because while there were experts all around Louisiana, they weren't in a coordinated fashion, or maybe not coordinated enough. And so the Water Institute was really created with that goal in mind. And again, the folks from Louisiana, I had been taking them to the Netherlands, showing them coastal infrastructure protection, urban water management, riverine water management, urban design, and we came up with this idea to help create a Deltares-like institute in Louisiana. And what are we? So we're an independent, not-for-profit research organization providing advanced technical expertise, really coastal, deltaic, and riverine within Louisiana, along the Gulf Coast, and around the world. We are part of the Restore Act. We're the Center of Excellence for the Louisiana Coastal Master Plan, and our goal is rather simple and rather admirable. Thriving communities, safe places, livable places that are in balance with the environment. Our research focus areas, these are rather broad topics: integrated watershed management, the dynamics of rivers, deltas, estuaries, and coasts, ecosystem-based management, human and natural systems modeling, and this is really some of the basic work that we do. We're trying to create the tools to help academics, to help policymakers, to help scientists working in and out of government, and to help the private sector to be able to run scenarios, understand what might happen under certain conditions, and then prepare people or institutions or critical infrastructure for that. And more recently, we've moved into the resilient community aspect and how you design for the future in these water-challenged areas, whether drought or too much stormwater. And I'll talk a little bit about that right at the end. So this shows, you know, how we work, where we work. We try to be at the center of this. The Dutch have a model called the Golden Triangle, which is academia, government, and the private sector. This is a version of that, a few more words in here, but really we're trying to be in the middle of all those places with the best science possible, or to identify the needs of those organizations or those institutions to serve their science and technical needs. It's a very important thing, and again, we try to work across all these dimensions. One of the things that the Water Institute has been really involved with was the latest iteration. Robert talked about the first and second iterations, but the latest iteration of the Coastal Master Plan, updated every 5 to 6 years. And in 2017, again, between 2013 and 2015, the Water Institute did a lot of the basic modeling and scientific underpinning with a whole bunch of other folks to move that process along and to make this the document it is, the plan that it is. I encourage you all to look at it. Louisiana has much to be proud of when you look at this document, and other states around the coast and other places around the world have looked at this and said, wow. Because not only are they saying what to do and how to do it, but they've also said what they're not going to do, making hard choices based upon science. So I encourage you to look at this. And there are 2 chapters under there, so please look at that, and those are some of the things that the Water Institute are doing. One of the things I wanted to talk briefly about, so Robert talked about building marshes for fun or building wetland for ecosystem services. And post-Katrina and clearly post-BP oil spill, it was very apparent that something serious needed to be done to rebuild some of the coastal marshes, because that is the protection and that is the economy. So what do you do here? And people had been wondering how, for a long time, how to get this sediment that's coming down the Mississippi River that flows out into the Gulf of Mexico and disappears back into the marshes. Because the river levees, as robust as they are, they did cause this disconnection between the levees, between the river and the sediment that the marshes need. So the Water Institute, again, this had been talked about for some time, but the Water Institute ran the models, built the models, worked with a lot of people to see, okay, how would such a sediment diversion work? Where would you best site it? And if you sited it here or there, how would the land accrete? What is that going to do to the ecology? What is that going to do to land building? What is it going to do to the people who depend upon those particular areas where the land is being built? So the models are there, and we're very proud of this. This will be the largest sediment diversion in the world when it's constructed. There's another one on the east bank of the river called the Mid-Breton sediment diversion, and we're working over there too. We're also working on nature-based solutions. So this is Port Fourchon. Many of you don't know, but Port Fourchon really impacts your life even up here in Virginia. 40% of the seafood coming out of the Gulf, it's about 40% of the U.S. seafood production comes out of the Gulf of Mexico. A lot of it comes ashore right there in Port Fourchon. And oh, by the way, what also happens there is all the oil and gas offshore industry is serviced by this port. So there's a lot of activity in the port, constant dredging, constant channel deepening, constant new harbor facilities, port facilities made. A lot of sediment. We can just dump it somewhere, but it's really in a sediment-starved area. That's just unwise. So the industry down there, and this is important, the oil and gas industry and others asked us to come in and help them understand how to rebuild the land around the port for ecosystem services and restoration and for protection, to show that they're interested in their game. They're in this game too. So we're working with them on models and trying to understand, where best to place that sediment and what's going to happen to it once it's placed. State of Louisiana has a lot of rivers. Virginia does too, but Louisiana has more, so there you go. Some of the river systems, the basins have models already done for them for floods and for flow, but not all of them. And the state really wants to develop a statewide flood model so that they can understand what's going to happen. And so we are helping them to understand how the models could work, help the parishes and the levee boards down there to understand what they need to do to build these models, and then we will build, hopefully, the model that sits above it that allows the state to manage this, see this thing as a system. So pretty important work. Real-time forecasting and flood warning systems. This isn't rocket science. A lot of people do this, but it's very important to understand that we are building these models for places, and we are giving them, or they're buying these models or taking these models from us, and then they can operate them. And we train them to do that so that they can keep adding stuff to that that's going to assist them. It's a very important thing. We're trying to underpin the decision-making capabilities of these places. And this is a project that's underway in Calcasieu Parish, mostly done. But again, taking the existing knowledge that we have and the data sets we have, wind speed and surge heights and wave heights and inland water movement and atmospheric conditions, and then this, getting a predictive model from there. One of the things that we're most excited about, and this is really for decision support at the higher level, so this is really a snapshot, a screenshot of a 3D movie that shows, simulates a levee breach in the Netherlands. And this is just one that we have made. But we can do this with pretty much any real-time forecasting model we made. But what this does is it allows you to see, you can simulate breaches or breaks or floods anywhere in any particular landscape. And then you can see from that place how the water moves. And you get water depth information, you get time series, you get time information of how it's going to move and when. And that allows decision makers and emergency managers and police and hospital folks to understand, what do you need to evacuate? What is safe for the next 3 hours? How do you move people out of here? How do you move people in here and all that? And this is a really important decision support tool for policymakers. And so it's an important thing that we're really excited about. And just to wrap up here, and I'm looking at Troy, I guess I'm right on time, good. 10 seconds. So we're working in a lot of other places too. It's not just Louisiana. In Fiji and the Pacific Islands on coastal and shoreline restoration and trying to help the folks out there deal with sea level rise and still maintain their identity in the economy. Mekong Delta, working in Texas on the coastal studies, all the various things going on there. That's a huge coast. Some of it's like Louisiana and some of it's completely not. Some of it's more like Virginia coastline, so important there. Two last projects we're really proud of. We were, the Water Institute, again, we're very young, but we were very proud to be selected to be the lead strategy partner for the 101st Resilient City of the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities program for the city of Houston post-Harvey. So we're leading that. We kick off the work next week, and here you go. We're trying to combine these physical systems, the ecology, the people, the place, the industry, and looking to move that, make that place a little bit safer. And then finally, I started in this region a long time ago with the Dutch Dialogues, and the city of Charleston and the greater Charleston region has asked us to come down and help them with that, to sort of serve as a catalyst to get them moving along the same way that Norfolk and Hampton did after our Dutch Dialogues. And that's it. Thank you.
Nice job. All my seafood friends in Virginia, though, tell me we don't eat anything. So none of none of the oysters are coming up here. We eat our own oysters. So it's my pleasure now to introduce John Spain, Executive Vice President of the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, who I've been told has been certainly so instrumental in setting some of the vision and particularly for the water campus, which you'll hear more about. Thank you. Thanks.
I've got a PowerPoint here. There it is. Yep. Okay, thank you very much. If you don't remember anything else, remember that communications, coordination, collaboration is the key. We've known each other as both friends and worked on this project now for over 10 years. The Water Institute of the Gulf that you just heard about is a non-profit created by a community foundation that I work for called the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, which is also a non-profit. Following Hurricane Katrina, as you've heard us all talk about, we were asked by then United States Senator Mary Landrieu to go to the Netherlands to learn what the Dutch people who have been living with water for literally centuries can tell us and how we can use that data to help our citizens in Louisiana. We came across a company called Deltares that is recognized around the world today as one of the best scientific organizations dealing with water. The senator said to the Community Foundation, we want you to create a Deltares for Louisiana. That is the Water Institute of the Gulf. It is by design a nonprofit. It was designed to be a scientific research arm to the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority, the state government entity, and to make sure that decisions were made based on good science, not politics. We've now been back to the Netherlands 12 times because we take our political leaders to go and see what the Dutch know, and we start now sharing our information, our experience on the Louisiana coast with them. The idea of the water campus is, where are we going to do this work? And when I sat and listened to some of the earlier sessions this morning, I thought that this room, in many ways, was an example of why we built the water campus. The idea was real simple. Everybody that is working on water-related issues need to be working together in one place. If you look at this room, and all of you represent very smart people working very smart organizations, but you largely work in silos. I was pleased to see that 7 universities are working together. What we decided to do at the water campus was, if you can imagine a large tent, and you invite everybody from the private and public sector who have anything to do with the coast, climate change, water issues, to come together and work together on that tent. Break bread together, have lunch, go to the water fountain, share information, build the laboratories and what they need to be successful on that. And do it at an independent place. Because what we learned, our good friends at LSU and Tulane and University of Louisiana all said, why don't you build it on our campus? And what happens, as you just acknowledged, is that when I do that, the other people don't want to come. So we said it's going to be a nonprofit, and it's going to be at an independent place on its own campus, and we're going to invite all of you to come and be a part of it, but we're not going to do it at your place. We're going to do it at our place. So let us tell you a little bit about where the water campus is today. If you look, that's the interstate bridge crossing the Mississippi River. The shaded light blue area is the water campus. It's roughly, as it tells you, 35 acres, and it is land that was owned by both the city and by the state, and both of those entities said, we'll lease it to you for 99 years for free. So we created a 35-acre site that is located between downtown and Louisiana State University's flagship campus. One of the exciting things that we loved about this site is that it's located on the Mississippi River. And as you just heard, the Mississippi River is the engine that we're going to use to rebuild the coast. We're going to capture the silt and the power of that river and do as Mother Nature did for millions of years, free the river once again to use that silt and water to rebuild our coast. So the idea that the scientists who are working on that have an office sitting literally over that water made a lot of sense to us. So what you see there is an old municipal dock, and we'll show you a better picture of it, that had been abandoned for 40 years. Everybody talked about, what can we do with this? And we thought, let's build a special place that talks about coastal water issues out on that dock. Here's the master plan for the water campus. We believe this is about an 8 to 10 year vision. We're just starting. It's ultimately 1 million square feet of office space, and we anticipate at some point maybe as many as 5,000 people working here. Think about federal agencies, Coast Guard, Corps of Engineers, USGS, all the federal expertise that we're going to need and are working with already, but housed in different places. Think about the universities. As you heard, LSU has pioneered coastal work going back before anybody thought it was an issue that had to be looked at. They have hundreds of people working on that. We're all coming together in one place. So here's kind of the diagram. You see there on the left side of that, the old dock, and that is the building that now houses about 50 scientists working on this. It has a conference center. I'll show you a little bit about that in a moment. And it actually does sit out on the river. The rest of those buildings will be built in various phases over the next 6-7 years. So, CPRA. We're not the smartest people in the world, but we kind of figured out that if you put the people from the state who are writing billion-dollar checks, maybe other people would like to be on the campus with them. So the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority recognizes something that I think our state did very well. It recognized, as you've heard in this room this morning, that multiple state agencies have jurisdiction over this area, and they all work in silos. And so the state of Louisiana put together something called the CPRA, and it brings together representations from multiple state agencies to actually identify how important this issue is to our state. If you're losing a football field of land every hour, you better pay attention to it. And you can't have people doing it in silos. CPRA is the agency that has the funding, control of the plan, and as you heard, develops those multi-year plans on what we're going to do. We said they have to be on the campus, and that's the building we built to house them there. That agency is now there. Next to it is probably Robert Twilley and LSU's maybe one of its proudest buildings. We believe this is the only one of its kind, maybe in the world. And I'm not a scientist, but I think this is probably one of the coolest buildings. If you get anywhere close, come see us. Basically, what I've been told as a layman, I'm going to tell to you. Scientists do most of this work now with computers. They figured out the very sophisticated modeling algorithms that do that work. But every once in a while, you kind of want to say, are the computers right? And this is what we call a physical model. This building is about a football field long. Did we tell you that LSU is beating Alabama tomorrow night? Okay. And in this, the picture on the right is you're now up on a balcony, second floor, looking over a model of the Mississippi River just south of my home in Baton Rouge to the Gulf of Mexico. This model can be flooded with water. When you heard them talking about cutting holes in the levee and pumping that silt and water into creating new land, that's what you can model here. It also has a ceiling that has 25 or 30 high-definition sophisticated projectors that can actually use the model floor as a screen. And those computers can build models and actually project them on that floor and show us what's going to happen 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years out based on what the scientists decide they're going to do in terms of how we use the power of the river. It's a tool for the scientists to actually see if it's right. The other piece that's critical, and it's critical to you and it's critical to us, and it's one of the lessons we learned early on by going to the Netherlands, you have to have the people of your state understand the importance of this. And so our goal is to have thousands of school children and adults alike go through here and understand why we're spending billions of dollars. They have to understand why this is important. My grandchildren have to go through and understand that that is a war that we're fighting and we have to win. It's an educational tool as well as a scientific tool. It's a one-of-a-kind. It's the second building that LSU built on this campus. This is the building I was telling you about on the old dock. It's a beautiful kind of iconic building. It's the place where those scientists do their work each day. It also has on the third floor a conference center, and you can see already that there have been meetings bringing in people not unlike you all who come and spend 2 or 3 days in our city talking to the scientists, coming together, exchanging data, talking about water issues. That slide on the left is a 10X meeting that was held earlier this year in that center, and 10X represents Interstate 10. And Interstate runs from Jacksonville, Florida to California, and if you look at Interstate 10, all of us have different water issues. We had people from Arizona talking about how do we use water living in a desert compared to Louisiana where we live with waters and we flood. And it's exchange of data, exchange of ideas, and an exchange of people. And the building was built in part to have these kind of conversations like we're having today and bringing people together regularly to exchange those ideas. Lots of meeting room, lots of different opportunities. This building is currently under construction. We expect it to be finished later this summer. It will house private engineering companies. We introduced this panel to talk about the economic development. I'm going to tell you an example we use in Louisiana. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, a bunch of guys got together in South Louisiana, and they were pretty smart guys, and they built what we now take for granted, an offshore oil rig. Nobody had ever thought about drilling oil in deep waters. And Louisiana guys got together and said, we can do this. As a result of that today, those original ideas are in oil wells, offshore rigs around the world. And Louisiana has benefited from that early knowledge, and we have control of that industry. As we do this work on the water, why in the world would we have the best scientists doing this? And then when we spend those billions of dollars building it, those companies that worked with us, private and public, then leave to go somewhere else. From an economic development job standpoint, we want to build a water industry based on the best science in the world here and attract private companies that will learn to work with us and take that knowledge to places like Virginia and charge you a lot of money for what we learned, okay? So this building will actually be filled with private companies, engineering companies that want to be a part of this project because they know we're going to spend billions of dollars. Why in the world wouldn't they want to be here? And so it brings together public and private, universities, educators, everybody under that big tent I talked about. People are going to live on this site. This is an apartment building. We'll start building that later this summer. This is kind of a main square. It will have a feature of water. Not surprisingly, it's going to have a little water, a little artificial river, some water fountains, because it's all about water. If you haven't heard anything else about Louisiana than football, the other thing we love is eating. And so you can't do work without eating, so we'll have some really very different restaurant opportunities on the campus. Think of this as a mini college campus doing work related to the water. So that's the story of the water campus, and we thank you for your time. We'd be happy to answer questions if we have time. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, John. To take us home and then to open up questions for folks, we're lucky to have Stephen Moret. Stephen is both the president and CEO of, well, actually he is the president and CEO of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, but formerly he was Louisiana's Secretary of Economic Development. So it has a really interesting perspective, I think, for bridging Louisiana football and oysters with Virginia and our oysters. So.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to be with all of you today, and especially to see my dear friends from Louisiana who I haven't seen for the last couple of years. John and David and Robert have spoken to the critical issues that face Louisiana and the reasons, really the rationale for why the Water Institute, the Gulf, and the Water Campus came together. I just want to add one, there's little that I can add to the substance of what they offered. I just want to add one additional lens, and that is the economic development lens. About 10 years ago, as we were looking to the future of Louisiana's economy, we were putting together a growth strategy for a state in which our major industry sectors were facing a long-term outlook of either stagnation or decline. And we needed to cultivate new growth engines for the state of Louisiana. We went through a pretty comprehensive strategic planning process, engaged McKinsey & Company and others to help us with that. And one of the really interesting ideas that came out of it was the notion of cultivating the water management industry as an export opportunity for the state of Louisiana. We knew that we were going to be spending tens of billions of dollars on coastal restoration work. We had all kinds of issues with hurricanes, with subsidence, with sea rise, and so forth. Could we take the lessons of the Netherlands and sort of become the Netherlands of the United States? And the belief was that that opportunity could ultimately result in tens of thousands of new jobs in science and engineering, and legal firms and so forth, law firms and so forth. And one of the early visionary elements of that, a piece of that that was really considered to be absolutely essential for our success, was the creation of the Water Institute, an institute that would really represent a combination of engineering and scientific expertise with public policy and law and bring all those things together to offer new solutions. And as John Spain said, to be a place that would not just attract sort of the government-funded activity, but would actually bring in those private sector firms as well. We had, I think, a very compelling vision. What we were really lacking was leadership and money. And the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, as one of the largest and most innovative community foundations in the country, agreed to take on that leadership role. They took some of their own funds. They took funds that BP had provided and allowed us to utilize for that purpose, CPRA and other dollars, and they have been bringing together really an extremely exciting vision that is already creating a great deal of economic opportunity for the state of Louisiana. So what does all that mean to the Commonwealth of Virginia? I think there may be an opportunity for us to leverage a similar concept here. When I think about all of the expertise in this room focused on addressing some sort of complementary issues for the Commonwealth of Virginia, could we also become a place that develops such a capability in this space that we're actually exporting research and services and other things around the world? How do we put that together? I think about the importance of collaboration between business and industry around innovation, around research and development. I think about the importance of cultivating a world-class workforce and continuing to invest in our research universities and other parts of our higher education system across the Commonwealth. I think about building a global image of Virginia as one of the places in the world with the people doing the best science and the best engineering in this venue across the world. One of the things that we're excited about, in particular at VDP, is the Virginia Sea Grant, Go Virginia planning grant proposal, which envisions creating an inventory and a map, really, of all the existing activity that's going on around this space with universities, throughout the Commonwealth, with industry, around all the assets that are critical to this space. And then secondly, developing an action plan for how those assets could be leveraged to build a larger, more vibrant, more sophisticated water management sector in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We obviously have a tremendous amount of assets to build upon. Of course, you all have to do the important work that you do every day. We're just hoping that we could also leverage this as an economic driver as well. And with that, we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. Did a really good job keeping us on time. Elizabeth, yeah, good job. I'm gonna actually I'll start with the first question, then I'm gonna launch you guys into it. But you know, we've heard a lot. There's been a theme, both from your stories, but from what you've been hearing here too, about collaboration, crossing sectors in that collaboration. Stephen, you talked about the things that kind of seem to almost be tipping points down in Louisiana, the leadership and the funding to tip it over. But I'm looking for, what are some of the other tipping points that you reached where you started to see some level of willingness to collaborate, even across sectors, whether it be the academic, the private sector, nonprofits, just those. What's the key there? What's some of what's in your gumbo?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say, not to be flip, but I think the leadership and the money was probably 80% of it. I do think that there was a recognition across those different players in government and academia and the private sector that there really was a recognition that something special and something important could be created if there was a greater level of collaboration than existed before. I think what was really missing was an entity to kind of pull that all together. And that's why I think the Baton Rouge Area Foundation's work to really spearhead, and really no other entity is more responsible for what is now coming, sort of blooming on the Mississippi River there, with both the Water Campus and the Water Institute of the Gulf. They have really provided the fuel to bring that to life. So I think of leadership, I think of funding, I think of collaboration, I think of looking at ways to leverage multiple entities to create more value than they could create on their own.
Make a comment. Since I've been watching this, I guess almost 20 years now, having participated in the process of planning and working on solutions, besides that 80%, it's matched with the demand side of what the communities need, and to frame that, usually a crisis helps do that. A hurricane will set the tone of your need. But a term that we use quite a bit, that I really think set up the demand side of this. You get the supply side of building these institutional capacity. The demand side is when you start monetizing risk, and when people start seeing the true cost of risk and doing nothing, then they start. I mean, they're and we're in a location now where when you have the Gulf of Mexico, literally, and I've heard stories already today, it's when water shows up with the dry socks and the wet socks. We talk about the similar type of program or perspective from the communities, and that is this sense of threat, and this sense of we have to respond. There has to be something that we need, and when they turn around and look for leadership to do that, that's when the institutions and these things have to happen, as that in parallel.
Dale?
Just from an outsider's view at that point, I was, again, at the embassy, but I think a crucial moment to encourage or stimulate or to pull people's ears to get this collaboration was Garrett Graves' efforts at the CPRA. So Garrett Graves, now a congressman, but worked on the Hill a lot of times, and he came in and he told Governor Jindal they needed to bring all these various state agencies that were working on components of these projects, and all the academics and all the private sector and all the folks who were working on these things, they needed to put them together. And so the creation of the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, and then the consolidation of the board, how the board works and how it works with the agencies, that interagency action, that really helped. And then as the money started to flow and projects started to build, everyone saw the benefit of it. There are still challenges there's no doubt. I mean, it is a big problem, wicked problem, but I think that was something that should go down as, you shouldn't forget that component of it. It was leadership at the political level.
Thank you. Questions? One right here.
Hello, is it on?
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking, if any y'all have any insight into the reports. You know, Louisiana has the unfortunate distinction of being the state of the home of America's first climate refugees. And for those who aren't aware, the Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw Indian people have lived for centuries 50 miles south of New Orleans, which puts them on islands. And since the 50s, their land has been reduced from something like 11 miles long, 5 miles wide, down to 2 miles long and a quarter mile. Back in early 2016, they obtained HUD funding to relocate their entire community to higher land, and I'm curious if any insight that you have to that.
Well, I think it's an indicator of what's to come. We know that we spend a lot of time talking about dikes and rebuilding land, but at some point, you get to a place where you're going to have conversations with people who may have lived on the land for 100 years and tell them they can't live there anymore. And you've got to get ahead of that problem. There's that whole separate issue of how are we going to deal with the, in some cases, involuntary movement of our citizens to a higher, drier place. And so that example, which was absolutely true and was on headlines literally around the world because of the issue related to climate change and sea rise and water issues in South Louisiana, but it's a relatively small model when you consider the city of New Orleans, for example, that is certainly threatened and is an island today. And much of the work, when you look at the modeling, questions, you know, how are we going to save one of the great unique cities of the world? But everything south of I-10, if you look at those maps, is being threatened at some point over the next 30, 40, 50 years, right? And we're going to have to move people. We don't have a choice about it, and I suspect you will as well.
Can I, and you know, one comment also to add, because every chance I get, I want to also reflect a little bit about, yes, these are climate refugees, but we also have to remember that in a parish just to the west, we use parish, not counties, just to the county, or parish just to the west, in the Chafalaya, where the river does exist, that shoreline has not moved since 1932 because of the way the river has been managed. So it's not just climate change. Climate change amplifies the decisions that we make on land use. And this is so that group is yes, and the shoreline has actually migrated right over their community, at the Ile-de-Jean-Charles community. And that migration is because of the way we manage the river. And so we have to think about, you know, it's not just climate change, but it's how climate change amplifies the decisions that we can control about water and land use. And we have to look at both of those, and if we don't manage them properly, we get the amplification that we're seeing right now in that one community.
Question there?
Yeah, we seem to be at a point where there are more projects in Virginia than there is funding at the local government level, both at the county and city level. Can you speak to, did the state of Virginia change how they funded local government projects? Was that with more federal funding, more state funding? How's that worked out? Or out of your $50 billion, how much of it is federal versus state versus, you know, local government taxes?
So I'll take in Louisiana, the master plan has a $50 billion cost to it based upon the decisions that are made within it. I think the folks in Louisiana think that they probably have $20 billion of that funded through tax revenues from the state, and the amount of project levels have gone up from $300 to $400 million a year now to $1 billion. So the state and the city and the localities are paying for that. Louisianans are paying for this. The devastation from the BP oil spill is also paying for some of this. And then as these needs come out and more projects need to be built or projects need to be identified, you know, there's a $50 billion, this is a $50 billion build out over 50 years. Okay, so you have time to find that missing component, but it's a dead serious effort to take it on. And my experience, and I'll say this as a Virginian, my experience is Virginia has been unwilling to step up. And there are very real communities at stake. I look at the Eastern Shore, I look at what's going on down here, I look at some of the communities around this wonderful bay, again, and I'm a Virginian. There has been a lack of, or there's a true disconnect between the importance of this region, not only to the rest of the nation for national security. Look to Ann to really take this on. This is an essential place for the U.S. And it's a wonderful place too, and it's a great ecology, and there's a lot of knowledge to be gained by working in this environment, just as there is in Louisiana. And I think, you know, that is a decision. You cannot, had this discussion with Whitney at lunchtime, please do not wait for the disaster when 1,000 people die and 300 people are, or whatever, you need $15 billion or $50 billion from the federal government. That's just too costly. So you need to get in front of it.
And I think our being here is also an invitation to joining us in a national conversation about how we join with other states and talk about how we're going to fund this long term. We need a coastal water, climate, call whatever you want it, caucus in Washington that has the populations of your state and ours and others that are going to be impacted by this to get Congress to focus on a long-term strategy on how we're going to fund it. Because your state community is not going to be able to absorb all of it any more than ours has. And you've got Norfolk, and you've got strategic assets that this country desperately needs. We've got a coastline that if we turned off the valve tomorrow, y'all are going to be cold tomorrow, because that energy feeds the East Coast right through that place that's going away every day. And each of our states brings something to the national dialogue, and we have to have a way of talking about how we make this a national conversation. And we get hung up on whether climate change is real or not. And in the meantime, we're losing a football field of land every hour in this state, in my state.
To wrap us up here a little bit, I think that that's actually probably a good setup for what the governor will be talking about in a bit too. Because I think that I've been here for 10 years, and I think we're at a tipping point. I am seeing momentum being built. I'm seeing partnerships gelling. I think the assets that are in this room and in the partners that you have, from all of you in this room, are about ready to take Virginia to another level. So I'm excited about it. I think there's a lot of opportunity in this space. So I want to thank the panel and for sharing and informing us about Louisiana's experience as it translates here too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.